Exploring Stories. SCP-7179 E is for eternity. What do you think happens when we die? Do you ever think to yourself that you'd want to live forever in a heaven or in your own little space, perfect, with everything you'd ever want and ever need? Today's SCP touches on that aspect without broaching on religion. That being said, we are looking at the SCP Foundation, so there is a twist to this, as always. Object Class: Safe. Special Containment Procedures. SCP-7179 is unable to be accessed or witnessed through non-anomalous means, which means containment is not required. Description: SCP-7179 refers to an unknown number of cubic extra-dimensional spaces, measuring approximately 10 km on each edge. Upon any human's death, their consciousness is transported to an instance of SCP-7179. They will physically remanifest in the same state as they were upon death, except in perfect health. Based on limited observation and experimentation, there are no known cases of human death where the consciousness does not appear in this SCP. Aside from insignificant differences between each of them, instances of this SCP are functionally identical. Each space is an oceanic environment with a single tropical island in the center. The environment of the space remains at a consistent temperature, one which is of adequate comfort to the deceased individual. Furthermore, SCP-7179 instances never display stormy or otherwise violent weather. The sun perpetually remains directly above the island, leaving it in eternal daytime. As there seems to be no natural wind, there's also no natural water activity either. Individuals attempting to leave this SCP instance simply end up on the opposite edge of the same space. SCP-7179 therefore acts as a functional omnilock. The passage of time within SCP-7179 is highly inconsistent with that of baseline reality. Plant life in this instance bears several different species of edible fruits, tropical fruits, and otherwise unknown species. These species are analogous to substances such as alcohol, methamphetamines, and cocaine. Animal life includes several varieties of tropical birds, butterflies, and a few instances of domestic pigs. Now, if you're like me, you're not just sitting around knowing what the word analogous as well as omnilock means. So if there's any moments in this story in which a word isn't frequently used in a conversation and would most likely need to be described to anybody above the age of 18, I will post a picture of the word as well as the definition for your understanding. On the coast of each island is a beach house, which contains various amenities and furnitures for the sustainable living. Each house is home to up to 3 human beings of sexual preference to the inhabitant. These beings seemingly bear no will of their own and are completely loyal to the deceased, but are otherwise completely identical to normal humans. Injuries suffered by humans within this SCP heal at a normal rate, although death is impossible. Seemingly fatal injuries are thus recoverable, albeit quite painful and quite slow. To summarize the instance, SCP-7179 is a beautiful island with a house on it and an undisclosed amount of fruits, which, when ingesting these fruits, give you similar effects to cocaine, methamphetamines, and alcohol, meaning human beings that are on these islands can still party, I guess, or whatever you want to refer it to, as well as having 3 different individuals who are subservient to you and align with your sexual preference. That means if I'm a man and I'm straight, I would thus have 3 different women of my sexual preference on this island with me. In this instance, you can still experience pain, however death is impossible, and any kind of great injury will result in healing, however it does take a long time for it to occur, which means pain is a long-term effect if you end up crippling yourself. That being said, this sounds awesome for anybody looking at this in the aspect of human life, 25 to 50 years to 75 years, but eternity is a lot longer than that. So let's get into the exploration logs to see why this SCP becomes such a nightmare. Addendum 7179.1 The Department of Tactical Theology was able to fully observe an instance of 7179 using the Experimental Intelligence Soul Interface Construct, also known as Dante.isic. The construct is mimetic in nature and fuses with the consciousness via the noosphere. This allows data to be relayed back to the physical world. Dante.isic was covertly applied to an individual named Paul Hiddleston, who is a 34-year-old man diagnosed with untreatable brain cancer. Hiddleston perished shortly after the construct was applied, and his consciousness was transported to SCP-7179. Here are the logs verbatim. Arrival. Hiddleston arrives on his instance of SCP-7179. He is standing next to a small beach house with 3 women, appearing to be in their mid-20s. Those individuals walk out of the house and greet him. After gaining his composure and becoming accustomed to SCP-7179, Hiddleston finds himself comfortable and begins to engage in frequent pleasurable activities, such as eating, drinking, drug use, and sexual intercourse. 2 years. Over time, Hiddleston starts to drink and partake in mind-altering fruits with much greater frequency, more than any other activity. Year 3. Hiddleston starts to neglect to eat at all for considerable periods of time. His occasional attempts to converse with the women on the island, but is frustrated by their lack of agency or individuality. 5 years. Hiddleston ceases his former activities altogether, spending much of his time wandering SCP-7179. 6 years. Hiddleston becomes panicked and attempts to leave SCP-7179, building a raft from one of the island's trees. Each time he reaches the edge, he appears on the opposite side. After several attempts, Hiddleston collapses in despair for a couple days until he regains his composure and continues his prior activity. 7 years. Hiddleston uses the wildlife and plant life on the island to begin pursuing culinary activities. He constructs basic farms and pens to keep and breed animals. His mental state begins to improve as he continues to develop his skills. 18 years. Hiddleston has become an expert in cooking, having both replicated dishes from memory and created brand new ones. He shows no signs of ceasing as he begins to attempt to crossbreed various plants. 37 years. Hiddleston continues his endeavors, although he begins to show signs of weariness and boredom. 81 years. Hiddleston has once again regressed into a depressive state. He seeks out other ways to occupy his time and eventually begins studying construction. He starts assembling tools and equipment for building. 101 years. After a great deal of trial and error, Hiddleston assembles his first house. He continues building. 287 years. Through a constant maintaining of trees and frequent building projects, Hiddleston is able to cover the island with rudimentary structures. He then focuses his efforts towards maintaining and upgrading the structures until he has mastered their fortification. 416 years. Hiddleston, through study, experimentation, and experience, has managed to fully fortify each structure into usable housing. He begins expanding his structures, adding extra stories and decor, as well as building various watercrafts. 850 years. Hiddleston's efforts slowly start winding down again, as his ability to produce lumber and harvest natural resources reaches an equilibrium with his construction expansion. He starts to tear down and rebuild structures in new ways, remixing them over centuries. 2009 years after arrival. Despite his frequent activity, Hiddleston shows worsening symptoms of depression and anxiety. He starts to consider seriously the concept of endless life in SCP-7179. His mental state continues to degrade as he searches for ways to keep a sound mind. 5,478 years later. Hiddleston starts tearing through his structures without reason. The whole village is torn down after several months. He starts rebuilding again. 11,902 years later. Hiddleston attacks the 3 women, tearing their bodies apart. He shows symptoms of severe distress after doing so and attempts but fails to take his own life by drowning himself. He continues to build over time, but intersperses his projects with bodily harm to himself. 19,600 years later, the three women are fully reassembled after 8,000 years. By this point, Hiddleston has grown numb to the concept of violence and begins bodily experimentation on them. 124,000 years later, Hiddleston builds a crude structure designed to crush him to death under the weight of several thousand tons of lumber and stone. Upon activation, it completely mangles and destroys his body. 900,000 years later, Hiddleston is now fully healed. It only took 800,000 years. While the experience appears to have been unbearably painful for him, the stimuli allows him relief from his boredom. He repeats this process in multiple different fashions. 5.8 million years later, Hiddleston burns himself alive. His body is fully reduced to ashes before the fire naturally dissipates. 16 million years later, Hiddleston is fully healed. It has taken 11 million years. He makes many similar self-destructive attempts upon himself, but each time grows more numb to the experience. 1.2 billion years later, Hiddleston ceases to exhibit rationality as he struggles to find new stimuli as the millennia passes. 8.5 billion years, Hiddleston tries to leave and fails. 30 billion years later, Hiddleston looks towards the sun. Once again, it has not set. 1 trillion years later, Hiddleston ceases all physical activity, as no experience is able to provide him with any new stimuli. 5 times 10 to the power of 28 to the power of 2. All potential permutations of particles within SCP-719 have theoretically been reached. 10 to the power of 100,000 years. 1 second of eternity has now passed. What makes this SCP so unique and horrifying isn't the aspect of fear or horror like the Shy Guy would provide you. It's more that when humans are actually given eternity, something that is sought by everybody at some point. Nobody wants to die, and everybody kind of wants to think that they want to live forever. But what is forever? What is eternity? Those are things that the human mind can never comprehend or should never experience. We're not made for that. That being said, thank you so much for listening to the end of this video. If you still are, please consider subscribing, leaving a like or commenting on this video. It helps the channel grow. We've also hit 1,500 subscribers, which is awesome. We're looking to hit 2,000, so let's see if we can hit that by the end of the week. Thank you all so much for your support, and have a great rest of your day.